The general custom is not to greet each other on Tisha B'Av and the 9th of Av. Some Sephardic Jews have a custom of a greeting, may you merit to see the redemption of Zion, the comfort of Zion. When we quote someone, we bring Geula to the world. So therefore, I'm introducing myself, Barnea Selavan, co-director of the Foundation Stone Education Organization. It's my honor to learn with you on this World Mizrahi Tisha B'Av program. I'd like to highlight the exile of Yechonya, Yehoyachin, which gets less press, with the exile of Tzidkiyahu, which includes the destruction of the temple. We'll also talk about the break into the walls in Tammuz and the return of Jews later on. When do we ever hear about Yechonya? Most people, they remember it vaguely from hearing Megillat Esther on Purim. Ima goyla shaglasai im Yechonya melech Yehuda. Mordechai went out with the exile of Yechonya. But a lot of people don't focus on his exile. Let's see how in the book of Kings 23, it talks about Yehoyachin, Yechonya. He was 18 years old. He ruled for 3 months in Jerusalem. He gives the name of his mother. Vayas hara b'nei Hashem. He did what was evil in the eyes of God. Kechol asher safiv, just like his father Yehoyakim. And Nebuchadnezzar comes up and puts them into siege. He gives in. He, his family, his palace entourage, and the vessels from the temple and vessels from the house of the king all leave. The Cheresh and the Masker, it sounds like professional craftspeople, the rabbis say, means the greatest rabbis. Mordechai is part of that. They leave and go into exile. Okay, I understand. It's the exile of Yehoyachin because he was the king. And what type of person was he? He was bad. That is heightened by reading in Jeremiah 22 about the evils of Yehoyakim, his father, and again about him. Right? I don't want to translate, the rabbis say disgusting things of how God views this person. It's like a vessel they have no desire in. Listen, land, listen. This says the Lord, write this person down. He's going to be Ariri. He will have no children. There's not going to be any future to the house of David. Bad guy. I got it. The question is, why do we find in the Mishnah that we have a gate named for him in the temple? Many historical references in the description of the architectural descriptions of the temple. We deal with past, present, and future. That's not our topic today. But in the northwest side of the inner court, there is a gate. And it says, Lama Nikra Shmo Shar Yechonya. Why is it called the Yechonya gate? Shebo Yatsa Yechonya Begaluto. Yechonya left through that gate in his exile. It sounds like we're giving him honor. Now I understand why we have a Shushan gate. We have a Shushan gate because, as the Ramban points out, Rabbi David Cohen showed me this Ramban many years ago, in that we have a commandment from Jeremiah, remember, not just, you won't talk anymore about the God who took you out of Egypt, you're going to remember the God who took you back from the lands of the north. And that's why we use the names Nisan, Tishrei, Iyar. We use the Mesopotamian names which are used there even today. And we have a drawing of the city of Shushan at the eastern gate of the Temple Mount to remember where we came from, a number of implications to that. Okay, that's positive. That's a commandment. Why are we remembering Yechonya? Moreover, twice in the book of Yecheskel, it stresses the exile of Yechonya. Yecheskel opens, in the 30th year, in the 4th month, which is the month of Tammuz, on the 5th of the month, I am in the Gola, the exile, on the river Kvar, and the heavens open up. He sees visions of heavens. In chapter 40, he has the vision of the third temple. And again, he gives the date based on the exile of Yechonya. But even more so this time, it says, in the 25th year, Legalutenu, to our exile. Now, I would have counted from the destruction of the temple. It's not. It's counting from our exile, the exile of Yehoyachin, of Yechonya. And the 25th year, on the 1st of Rosh Hashanah, on the 10th of the month, that means it's the Yovel year, the Jubilee year. That's when that year starts. 14 years after the city was destroyed, in the middle of that day, I had a prophecy, and God takes me to see the third temple rebuilt. So what's 30 years from? 30 years from Yovel. The Targum says it's 30 years from when the Torah scroll was found as a warning of the destruction, heralding the destruction to come under Yoshiyahu. And the Radak says it fits in well for both of them, and that the vision of the chariot is coming from Bavel, as the rabbis say, to empower Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon to destroy the temple, but it's focused on the exile because of the impending exile. The destruction has not happened yet, and the vision that happens of the building of the third temple is happening in Israel to give that hope, and that just like the slaves become free, so too you will become free. And again, the first vision of the destruction is in Tammuz because the city is going to be broken into then. Why are we focusing on Yechonya? And that is our exile. These powerful walls are from the time of the first temple. According to Professor Eilat Mazar, they're from King Solomon, but all scholars agree it's from the time of the first temple and would have gone even higher with mud bricks on top. Apparently we're in administrative buildings that are on the outside of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount area. Tremendous storage over here. All of these doorways are here from the time of the first temple. And according to Professor Mazar, she suggests that we are standing in a gate. And this was destroyed in that Jerusalem of Tzidkiyahu. When the exiles came from the destruction of the temple, they found the exiles of Yechonya already there, who, by the way, greeted them with white clothes on the outside as if happy to see their king, and black clothes of mourning on the inside. But the rabbis say in the Gemara in Gittin 88 that this was a tremendous blessing for God. Because the exile of Yechonya and the leaders were already there, there was a Torah infrastructure to welcome the exiles of Babylon. When my Zayda, Moshe Cohen, came to New York, there wasn't such an infrastructure. He was fired so many times on a Monday because he didn't come to work on Saturday, on Shabbat. Not everybody made it through that. People dropped their mitzvot because there wasn't an infrastructure to receive them. So the Galut of Yechonya, Yechonya's exile, welcomes the exile of Tzidkiyahu. But what about Yechonya himself? So why is Yechonya so special that we name a gate by the way he went out, and we mark times from that Galut? Okay, the Sanhedrin went out with him. Rashi says Yecheskel went out with him, I understand. But it turns out that he's very special, even though the verse says that he was a Rasha and not doing what God wanted. Yoyakim was not faithful to Nebuchadnezzar. He was called in once to Bavel when Daniel, Mishael, Hananiah, and Azariah came with him. And then Nebuchadnezzar comes to Antiochia, to the north of Israel, and the Sanhedrin go out and say, is it time for this house to be destroyed? He said, no, I just want that person Yoyakim. He hasn't been faithful to me. So the Sanhedrin comes and says, Nebuchadnezzar wants you. He says, so what? We don't turn people over. He says, in your family you do. Sheva ben Bichri was turned over, and therefore the city was spared. Yoyakim refused to go. The Sanhedrin took care of it and got him to Nebuchadnezzar. Now Nebuchadnezzar comes home, and everybody says, wonderful. He says, and who's in charge? I put his son in charge. They say, it's hard enough to get a good dog from a bad dog from a bad dog. He says, you're right. He comes back to Antiochia. The sages go out. Is it time for the Beit HaMikdash to be destroyed? No, the one that I set up, give him back to me. So they come and tell Yoyachin, Nebuchadnezzar wants you. What's his reaction? He goes to the roof of the Beit HaMikdash with the keys to all the temple. He says, God, you gave this over to our hands. We weren't faithful. Take them back. Throws them up. And either they didn't come down or a hand comes down and takes them. And he goes into exile. The rabbis talk about how great the atonement is for going into exile, until the point that Rabbi Yochanan says, no, it fixes everything, because look, Yoyachin was not meant to have any children, and in the end he has Shaltiel in a miraculous way. And on the way to exile in Nahardah, Yoyachin and the sages had taken stones and earth from the temple and made the Beit Knesset of the Shechina, which is there, of divine presence, which is there. And he gets thrown into the pit. It just so happens that Evil Merodach is also there, because when Nebuchadnezzar went crazy for 7 years, Evil Merodach took over, and when Nebuchadnezzar came back, he got very upset and threw him in. The Rambam talks about this in Megillas Esther, and that will play a role in a minute. Yes? So he goes into the pit. Now there's a curse on him that there will not be any children from him. But God now has mercy. And the Sanhedrin says we have to do something. There's a continuity to the house of David. And they use political connections that gets up to Nebuchadnezzar's wife. And Nebuchadnezzar comes to have relations with her. He says, oh, the king wants to have relations. Yoyachin is also a king. What about him? So they lower his wife down to him in the pit. And she says, I'm sorry, I saw something red. It was zivut. They pull her back out. She purifies herself, goes to the mikveh, comes back. And the Talmud says normally one does not conceive from having relations standing up. But he was only able to stand up, and they have a child, Shealtiel. And God forgives the oath that he made that there shouldn't be children. He nullified it. So Yoyachin listens, responds, accepts, keeps the Torah under dire conditions, and God says, in Jerusalem you didn't keep it, but now you're listening to Har Sinai. He gives him a tremendous blessing. And then the verse says, at the end of Malachim, the Evel Moradach pulls him out of prison and dresses him differently, puts him above all the kings, and he has Aruchato Tamid. He has his daily meal. On one hand, the Talmud says this is a fulfillment of David's curse to Yoav, which was reversed on him. David said he should be chaser lechem, he should be missing bread, and now the descendant of David is dependent on bread. But the Medrash also says that here he is being taken care of, and that once, says the Yalkut Shimoni, once b'shasha Kadosh Baruch Hu noting shalva tzadikim, if God gives peace to tzadikim, what Yaakov searched for, to just have shalva, then Eino not lemem atshu machnisim am legan Eden. He does not stop that until he brings them into Gan Eden. In other words, Yoyachin ends his life in a tremendous blessed state, and he's called a tzaddik. So that's in sharp contrast to Tzidkiyahu, who's brought to Bavel, watches his sons being killed in front of his eyes, and is killed. We have 3 documents from Bavel that relate to Yoyachin. We have the food ration of Yoyachin and his family. This 10 liters of oil to Yoyachin, king of Judah. 2.5 liters for the 5 sons of the kings of Judah. 4 liters for the 8 Judeans, and another 10 liters to Yoyachin. 2 different documents. And in the Babylonian Chronicles, we have Nebuchadnezzar arriving, taking Yoyachin into Galus, and replacing him with Tzidkiyahu. If we understand it correctly, it happened on the 2nd day of Adar. So we have the archaeological evidence of Yoyachin's presence in Babylon. He listened. He ends as a tzaddik. The Talmud says that the only reason why we have the words of the prophets, besides Joshua, to know the boundaries of land of Israel, is because of the Musar HaNeviim. We need to know how to respond. And we saw in this story the difference of who listens to the word of God through Yirmiyahu, who gets the response, and who isn't listening. So the book of Kings begins with David, who come Olo Shel Tshuva. He demonstrated how an individual can do tshuva, can repent and change the situation. And it closes with Yoyachin, who was originally destined to be childless and was an enemy in the eyes of God, turning into be a tzaddik. He responded. What a message for us. Can we respond? Can we listen? We're in the Bible Lands Museum, Babylon exhibition, especially opened for this World Mizrahi Tisha B'Av program. Here is Assyria and Babylon. And Babylon comes and follows the Fertile Crescent and captures all of the kingdoms here, which the area called Chet or Chatu by the Babylonians, and threaten Judah, have destroyed Ashkelon. Nebuchadnezzar has taken control. And Yirmiyahu warns time and time again, listen to Bavel, I've put them in charge. King Yoyakim dies, King Yoyakim takes over, and after only 3 months and a few days, he's put under siege, and he is told, give in. Nebuchadnezzar comes, and he and all of his family and the leaders leave the city, even have a gate to the north of the Temple Mount, which we call, in the time of the second temple, the gate of Yoyachim, to remember he left by this door. And he and his family go into exile into Babylon. And the last king, Tzidkiyahu, takes over. Yoyachim goes into exile, and Yirmiyahu sends a message to all of those who were there in exile in the name of God. B'nu batim v'shevu. Build houses and dwell there. V'nitu ganot v'chud peryayim. Plant gardens and eat their fruit. And get married, have your children married, big families. It will be good for you there. Ultimately, you will come back. And so, there is Yoyachim in exile, but there's another 11 years to go still in Jerusalem. We have found archaeological proof that the people who went into exile listened to Yirmiyahu. Thieves found a cache and archives of Jewish records. And we can trace one family, Tzidkiyahu, perhaps born in Judah. And some of these tablets, they're written in Akkadian, but some of them still have signatures in ancient Hebrew. And we can trace as much as 5 generations, perhaps, of this family in business. And other members of the community, people who are involved in business deals, people who are witnesses, Zechariyahu, Hananiyahu, Obadiyahu, Midayahu, Tzidkiyahu, they are retaining over 100 years their identity as Bnei Israel, as Jews within the exile. How do they date these documents? By the year of the king. So here is a brick that actually shows that it's a royal brick made for the government of Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, who ultimately destroys Jerusalem and the temple. The first tablet that we have is dated from year 33 of his reign. So we trace it through Darius, we trace it through many generations. We know we have 100 years of this family. The documents show eking out a living. Chaim has a cow. Yaakov has a field. Shlomo has seed. We make a deal together, and who's responsible for feeding the cow? And when the end of the harvest season comes, then we'll divide the profits according to the following deal. For this one we need 2 cows, and he has a wagon, and he has the seeds, and so will be the witnesses. Very simple deals, but eking out a living and having dates. It talks a lot about dates, the famous dates of Bavel, and barley, and simple houses. So this is a model of the type of villages where the Babylonians put the exiles in order to build up land that had been destroyed with all the wars with the Assyrians, and they let them keep their original leadership and their family units, as opposed to the Assyrians who broke them up. The Babylonians were no longer worried about rebellions, and they said, sure, let the leaders continue being leaders. And they even put different ethnic groups together. So you have Egyptians and Philistines, and where should we put the people from Israel? In Al Yehudu. That's like New York. It's New Jerusalem. That's the name used for the capital city of Jerusalem. Now we don't know exactly where this archive was, but because of the names that appear on the documents, we know it's somewhere in this range, between the Tigris and between the Euphrates, because these are the cities whose existence and locations we know. We even have one that's on the Har Kfar, the vision of Ezekiel on the river, on the Chebar River. We even have one documented there. And these are the real tablets, which are belong to a number of different collections, and which are gathered here. Some were burnt, some went through but these are the real tablets with the generations of people who were first exiled by Yechonya, and then others joined them later. But the Yechonya exile set the basis for it. Now Jeremiah contrasts, he has a vision of two pots of figs. One is a wonderful pot of excellent figs, and one is rotten. And God says, you're sealing very well, because the exile of Yechonya, V'samti eni alehem l'tovah, they are going to be wonderful, and I'm going to bring them back to this land. I will build them up, I won't destroy them, I will plant them, I won't uproot them. But the bad figs, which can't be eaten, that's Tzidkiyahu, king of Judah, and his officers, and the rest of Jerusalem, which are still in that city, and which are in Egypt, they are going to be dealt with horribly, and the sword is going to be there. And here is evidence of that. This is a pot found in Area G in ancient Jerusalem. The heat of the destruction of Jerusalem was so intense that the clay remelted, and that's why it's misshapen. And these are pots of the Jews found in the homes of Jerusalem, which were destroyed. And here are actual Babylonian weapons from the destruction of Jerusalem, from Lachish and Judah. These are sling stones that would be thrown with deadly accuracy. And here you have Scytho Iranian arrowheads made with very high quality, much better than the Judahite ones, and a clear fingerprint that the Babylonian army has been there. So here is the contrast between the exile of Yechonya, which has a continuity, and people building families, and they're growing, and they're making a living for decades and decades and decades, as opposed to Tzidkiyahu, which led to death and destruction. Here's the Western Wall that everybody knows. But right here, where they dug the foundations for the building that's going up, Shlomit Wexler-Dolach found huge walls, remains of personal items with names on them from the time of the first temple, and then a layer of dust and neglect. I find it fascinating that Shlomit played here as a little girl in September 1967, and then ends up being the excavator here. Here are these very large buildings in the back of the Western Wall Plaza of today, right where everybody's walking over the staircase. They must continue underground. They're very well made. Shlomit believes that it be domestic buildings, not public buildings. And all types of fill and ruins were found here, such as Le-Cha-Gav. Now that's backwards ancient Hebrew script, because this is a seal which would then be impressed onto clay, and it would be read correctly, and it would be sent as a message from this person. Here is a seal impression, Le-Sar Ha'ir, belonging to the governor of the city, and that is a biblical position that's known. So what's the explanation for all of this First Temple period junk in these buildings? Shlomit discussed it with Dalit Ram Shiloni, professor of Bible at Tel Aviv University, my neighbor, and Dalit suggested that perhaps you have found the exile of Yechonya, where the leadership has left, the buildings are falling in disrepair, left around, and only later destroyed. Professor Oded Lipschitz taught this to me in Tel Aviv University. He likes this idea. It's a suggestion. One cannot say that one has archaeological proof, Shlomit says, but it is a suggestion that perhaps what we are seeing here is the exile of Yechonya, and the evidence for it. Maybe. There's a very enigmatic opening to a chapter of Yirmiyahu. Chapter 37. Tzidkiyahu becomes king, gives the background. Great. Listen to verse 2. V'lo shamahu v'avadav ha'ma'aretz el divrei Hashem asher diber biyad Yirmiyahu Navi. And the king did not listen, he and the servants and the people of the land, to the word of God that came through Jeremiah. That's the type of verse we have at the end of a chapter as a wind-up. He was good, he was bad. Why is it here before anything happened? Tzidkiyahu just became king. Listen to verse 3. And the king Tzidkiyahu sent Yehochal son of Shelemiah and Tzvanyahu son of Maaseiah Kohen to Yirmiyahu Navi, saying, Hitpalel na ba'adenu, please pray on our behalf. It's a tough situation here. Please help our new government. El Hashem Elokeinu, to the Lord our God. The prime minister of Israel sends top government officials to the chief rabbi saying, could you please pray at the Western Wall for us? I think it's Shakespearean the narrator off stage says they're not really listening. So now that I have the king sending top officials to the prophet saying, please pray for us, it's just for show. They don't really mean it. The proof of the pudding is that later when Yirmiyahu was saying anybody who leaves the city will at least be alive, anybody who stays here is going to be run through by the sword or starvation, it's going to be terrible. 4 people go to Tzidkiyahu and say, you have to kill this guy. And he gives them over to his hands. They throw him into a pit. God protects him. One of those 4 people is this same Yehochal ben Shelemiah, who was sent by the king to speak to the prophet as a prophet to speak to God. Doesn't that show that they're not really listening? A seal impression made by the seal ring that Yehochal ben Shelemiah wore was found right here in this pit, a piece of clay. You see it demonstrated over here. And now, because we found the seal, the actual piece of clay, Professor Eilat Mazar found it and deciphered it, I can tell you that his grandfather's name was Shobai. So the buildings here were definitely in use at the end of the First Temple period. This is when Tzidkiyahu begins his rule. This is the beginning of the end. Let's read a story that appears in the Book of Kings, Jeremiah, and Chronicles, in Melachim, Yirmiyahu, and Divrei Yamim. It was in the 9th year of Tzedkiah's reign. In the 10th month, on the 10th of the month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babel, came. He with all of his soldiers came to Jerusalem, and they camped against it and built a siege wall around it. The city was besieged until the 11th year of King Tzedkiah. On the 9th of the month, the famine was exceedingly strong in the city, and there was no bread for the people. Vatibaka ha'ir, and the city was broken open. The soldiers ran away with Tzedkiah. He's caught by Jericho, but the city has now broken open on the 9th of Tammuz. The Talmud discusses why do we fast on the 17th of Tammuz and not the 9th? The Babylonian Talmud says because we suffer from the time of the Second Temple, we can't make 2 fasts. The Jerusalem Talmud says, and the Tosafot brings it, that the people were so confused from the over 2 years of siege, they lost track of time. Moon sightings, datings, and they experienced it as the 9th of Tammuz. It actually happened on the 17th, even though there's a difference between the waxing and the waning of the moon, but the verse is reporting to it from their perspective. The man on the desert island says, and then on Tuesday I saw a ship and I was shaved. It was Sunday. But we're going to experience it the way that man experienced it. He experienced it as a Tuesday. Let's look at the finds here. We are under a school and under private houses in Jerusalem. The actual dimensions of Jerusalem in the time of the First Temple in its different stages and before the First Temple is all a matter of discussion. These maps follow Professor Nachman Avigad of blessed memory's approach, and these signs are here in this site from the 1980s. And according to that, this southeastern hill is identified as the city of David with the Gihon Spring. There's an area in between that and the Temple Mount, and then the city expands, and we are here, outside a line of walls running from the Temple Mount to today's Jaffa Gate, and Professor Avigad is assuming there's nothing of the city to the north. I beg to differ, but I'll have to prove that. So we're here right outside the city. Now there also remains here from the time of the Second Temple, and there are fortifications here from the Hasmonean times. We're right here. We are a moment away from where I live, and we're under the school where both of my daughters went to school. Here is today's Street of the Chain going to the Temple Mount and David Street going to Jaffa Gate. Here's Chabad Street running north-south, Jewish Quarter Street, Hayudim running north-south, And actually, they're both built along the lines of the Byzantine period Cardo North-South Street that some say is from the time of the Second Temple. The green here is what's called the Broad Wall, a wall that archaeologists date to the time of Hezekiah and Isaiah and the battle against Sennacherib, king of Assyria. According to the latest reports published by Hillel Geva of the excavations of Professor Nachman Avigad of the 1970s and 1980s, actually starting in 1969, this was no longer functional. It was even covered over when the fortifications we are about to stand next to existed. The blue here is the fortifications in the time of Tzidkiyahu, king of Judah, that faced the Babylonians. The yellow here is a Hasmonean addition onto the First Temple period fortifications, which we have found this pattern in a number of places outside Jaffa Gate and in a few areas right around us. In the Cardo of the Jewish quarter, there are remains of these walls. Here, the person who made this dates these walls to be Hellenistic Hasmonean also, and one piece from the time of the First Temple. Abir Nasi in the Oil Art Gallery found another piece that Professor Avigad identified also as, so this is conjecture with the two lines, he identified another piece of this wall, and there are other remains in here, deep in the excavations, which have not been sufficiently explored. But the idea is that we are facing north, and there's a suggestion that here was a gate. Here are pictures. This is the process of the excavation. Up here is street level, where I live, and they were coming down step by step, stage by stage and deeper. If you ever read Mike Mulligan and the Steam Shovel, they dig a pit and he can't make himself out. Here they left room to be able to go out level by level. And the wall we are about to see is just beginning to appear over here. All of this will be removed, and the Hasmonean wall is going to start appearing down below here. This is from the time of the First Temple. Layer by layer, all documented, all under pressure while construction is going on. They were even unable to continue digging from here to the very nearby Broad Wall because they had to leave a street open for people to get back and forth. At the end of the excavation, here we have it. Look at the people for size comparisons. This wall is a very powerful fortification from the time of the First Temple, and it's a corner here. You can see little stones in between big stones. The Assyrians over a century earlier developed a tank that would come, and not as a Roman battering ram smash, but would come and pry out in between stones and therefore crack through a wall. But this is a very thick, powerful wall. It's a corner. Whereas this wall is 2,100 years old, give or take, from the Maccabees, from the Hasmoneans. Now, going down here along the wall at a certain level, in locus 279, an amazing find came out. And that is here. This is a close-up picture. In a moment, we'll be standing where it was actually taken. The dark part here is ash. The flat, simpler arrowheads are Judahite arrowheads. Deadly and can kill, but don't have any, it's like a softball as opposed to the best aerodynamic golf ball. Yeah, but think deadly. The Scytho-Iranian arrowhead is made with fins and aerodynamically flies through the air, and with barbs on the back, so when it penetrates a body and somebody tries to save the person's life and pulls the arrow out, they're ripping on the way out. A recent work by an MA student at Tel Aviv University showed how Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian army even improved their weaponry in the years when the destruction of the First Temple took place, as opposed to earlier models. Professor Oded Lipschitz says because Nebuchadnezzar took a year break, as described in the Babylonian Chronicles, and he remade his army from a local army into the army of an empire. completely different standards. That's the Babylonians who destroyed Jerusalem. The rabbis in the commentaries say, why is it that the chariot of Ezekiel is coming from the north? Because the chariot went there to give power to the Nebuchadnezzar, that the king of the world is the one who's going to destroy Jerusalem, not just any other king. It's part of the honor of Jerusalem itself. But this is opposing forces. Now arrows fly back and forth, and I can use my enemy's arrow back against him. So you don't know who's the last person who shot, and they can be captured. But this is a battle scene. There's no question that this is a battle scene at the foot of the wall. And let's now walk to this fortification, which is from the time of the first temple. Ignore these walls, which are only 2,100 years old. They're not here. Apparently a gate of a city. Look, it goes down, very well built, and on the earth here was found arrowheads of the battle here. Vatibaka ha'ir, the city split open. We are standing here where it happened. When I'm filming this with the help of Mayor Eisenman, it's the 8th of Tammuz, 5780. But we are here in the scene of the events of the breaking into the walls of Jerusalem in the time of the first temple. For that also, in the breaking of the walls, Jerusalem is no longer whole, and all of the significance that implies. That's why the Jewish people have been fasting for many, many years, so that we appreciate these events, we see what led up to these events, what are the flaws, and as Maimonides says, if we work out, if we fix the issues which are still with us, we repair ourselves, and it goes all the way back and repairs for our forefathers as well. We can fix it. So we're going to remember this day not as a commemoration, but to remember, as Rav Matas Weinberg stresses, I'm making it again part of my consciousness. It's just more powerful here, underneath where children are playing, underneath where people are living, thanks to people who gave their lives and risked their lives to restore Jerusalem, holy Jerusalem to us. Here we are at the scene of the 9th of Tammuz in the time of the first temple. We're looking at a Lamelech jug handle. The little squiggles above the birds say Lamelech, meaning belonging to the king of Yehuda. This is from the time of the first temple, Beit Rishon. And over here is a jug handle with 2 concentric circles. That is dated to the end of the first temple period. So we're talking about the time when Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon destroyed Yerushalayim. And here, right behind us, under Yeshivat HaKotel, here in the Wall Archaeological Museum, there is a building from the time of the first temple, which is now covered over. This is where these handles were found. And this Judean pillar figurine. This is Avodah Zarah. This is idol worship. This is one of the cardinal sins for which Yerushalayim was destroyed. We're in the City of David National Park, and we're in what the archaeologist Yigal Shiloh called Area G. These lower remains are structures. This was a 2-story building. This staircase. These are structures of either private homes or offices belonging to the administration of Jerusalem in the time of the first temple. They're built onto earlier remains whose dating is questioned. But on this, there is no question. These homes were here. The ruler was Tzidkiyahu, king of Judah. Here is a toilet. At least 6 toilets have now been found. And in this one, they examined the material from underneath and found evidence of 2 different types of worms that affect people who are living in starvation conditions, stomach worms. Evidence of the suffering that was here towards the end of the first temple period, with the siege going on for several years by the Babylonian forces. In the rooms behind us, there was so much ash that was called the burnt room. When this staircase was in use, prophets and kings were in Jerusalem. All archaeologists agree that you're looking at the burning of the city, the Judahite city, by the Babylonian forces. You are looking at the destruction of Jerusalem in the time of the first temple. This is an actual archaeological excavation. It's called the Givati Excavation because there was a parking lot here that was called the Givati parking lot because of a terrible incident that happened when the Givati Marine Brigade of the Israeli army was having an event here. And I even came into cars and parked here, but that's long gone. We are many layers under the surface. There are 15 layers of history here. And since this is focused on Tisha B'Av, I'm not going to show you now the Greek fortifications here that the Maccabees fought, but rather we're going to descend into an earlier period to the time of the first temple. There is an official in King Yoshiyahu's cabinet called Natan Eved Melech. And we found a piece with his name on here and other signs here that this building that we are now entering was a massive building, a grand building with very special plants, with very special decorations, and very powerfully built. Look at these columns here, carved out of stone with niches over here for either tying an animal or a way to close the door, but often we say this type of piece was for tying an animal. But we are here in the destruction. When you look over here at piles of rubble and you see them on an angle, this is destruction. And there was burning here. And in fact, special scientific work is being done in this room against this side where organic and other remains are being taken out of this wall to detect the layers that was here. Do you see how it seems to be a layer of plaster of a floor from an upper room that then fell down and was here? So they're taking samples here and checking the paleomagnetism of them and checking the organic remains to date this. But the archaeologists agree that what you and I are now standing in here is a room that was a beautifully built building, part of the administration, either residence or offices of the kingdom of Judah, destroyed by Babylon, destroyed by Melech Bavel. We are a 5-minute walk from the Western Wall prayer area. We're in the southeastern slope, which many consider to be the city of David, but the City of David National Park is here. This is going to be part of the City of David National Park, but we are in the destruction of Tisha B'Av, of the destruction of the first temple. This glory of Jerusalem was long covered by many, many, many layers to the sky, and it's only through persistent work and the hope that something would be found here, because we're in a vale, V-A-L-E, between two hills, and Tel Aviv University thought maybe something would be here of the transition of the end of the first temple to the beginning of the second temple. They found this building shortly before Tisha B'Av several years ago. This glory of Jerusalem is forgotten physically. It's just now been rediscovered over the past while. The official publications are only going to start coming out soon. It's appeared in conferences that only archaeologists and aficionados go to. But we who learn the texts learn about the glory of Jerusalem that was then. We who learn the texts know that we lost this glorious Jerusalem that was obliterated because of our sins, because of the way we behaved. We who learn the texts know that the restoration of Jerusalem is not a matter of being victorious in battle. It's a matter of being victorious in the soul, completely overhauling how we act as individuals and how we act as people. And then there'll be a Jerusalem built that's even more glorious than this one. We are again sitting in the Jerusalem destroyed by the Babylonians. I suggest that the difference between Yechonya and his success and the continuity of that community in Bavel and Tzidkiyahu and the destruction of Jerusalem is in that Velo Shama. Tzidkiyahu, no matter how many times Yirmiyahu speaks to him and begs him to open up the city and respond, he doesn't respond. Yechonya, the moment the sages speak to him, responds, goes into exile, keeps the Torah under tremendous duress. What a success. And we see the continuity, the full circle of this by the end of Chronicles and in the book of Ezra, where we have Koresh announcing, come back. We have a Cyrus cylinder. There was found a Cyrus cylinder that it's the same person talking, saying, I am king of the world, and I brought back the gods of Babylon to Babylon. Yeah? But this same Koresh Melech Paras, it says at the end of Divrei Hayamim, in his first year, in order to fulfill and complete the words of God by the mouth of Yirmiyahu, the 70 years, there's 2 cycles of 70 years, God lifted up his spirit and word went out, and also by letter in writing, saying, thus says Koresh, the king of Paras, God has given me all the kingdoms of the world, the Lord of heavens, and he commanded me to build his house in Jerusalem and Judah. Who from all of your nation will God, his Lord, will be with him and come up with him. And we open up with Ezra with the same idea, and we see that the vessels that were taken into exile by Nebuchadnezzar, reversing the exile of Tzidkiyahu, are now starting to come back to Jerusalem. Not only that, it mentions the areas where the people are coming back from, and one of them is Tel Melach and Tel Harsha. Now these are names of destruction, and the Talmud interprets it about the behavior of the people. But these are the areas that the archaeologists identify where the Al Yehudu archive, where those people lived. They sowed and reaped and planted and rebuilt those areas of Babylon, and they eventually come back to Jerusalem. And so as it says in Yirmiyahu, while he's in jail and he's being told, buy this field, and he tells God, but buying a field, the Babylonians are upon us. You're going to be back. You're going to be back. And then later he tells them there's going to be Kol Sason v'Kol Simcha once again in Jerusalem, because all the houses of idol worship and how these people behave, they're destroyed. Now there's going to be Mishpat Utzedakah in Jerusalem. May we merit those days soon. It's very clear that exile from the land of Israel is a punishment. It's a response to our actions. But in the greater scheme, we learn and we gain from each exile, as painful as it is. There's something that we take away from it. Kibbutz Galut means the ingathering of the exiles. Rabbi Weinberg explains that it's also the Galut to reveal. There's something which is developed in every exile. We brought back so much from Bavel. We appreciate that we came back. That's why we have Shar Shushan, the Shushan gate, to know that the Persian Babylonian exile where we came from, that's marked in the eastern gate of the temple. But one of the gifts that we developed in that exile is the Babylonian Talmud, Talmud Bavli. In the week this exhibition originally opened, we started the Tractate of Yevamot, and the museum displays a very special Talmud that was made by the American Army for the refugees in Germany to be able to start learning Torah again. And the volume of Yevamot from that set was chosen for the exhibition. How appropriate. So we have here a tablet from 110 years after the exile into Babylon, and we today are still studying and gaining from what was developed there. And we look forward to the future. And Yirmiyahu says, buy properties, keep your connection, be aware, because I'm going to bring you back to the land of Israel. And we are sitting here with tablets of those Jews sent to Babylon, and we are back here in Jerusalem, in the Bible Lands Museum in Jerusalem, and we can appreciate this story. Chaim David, Tisha B'Av, we need the love of Yerushalayim, we need the love of Am Yisrael. We're overlooking Makam HaMikdash. What should we sing?
There's a little song which little talks about that from the Kodesh, from the Makom HaMikdash will come some very, very big Yeshua, big help. Ezra, it's from David HaMelech. Shlach Ezracha MiKodesh u'mitzion Yisadeka. It's an old song of mine.
Let's hear it. Let's sing, and everybody can sing along.
Vishlach Ezrecha Mikodesh Umitzion Yisadeka Vishlach Ezrecha Mikodesh Umitzion Yisadeka Vishlach Ezrecha Mikodesh Umitzion Yisadeka Yishlach Ezrecha Mikodesh Umitzion Yisadeka Idai dai 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 Bum 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 Yishlach Ezrecha Mikodesh Umitzion Yisadeka Yishlach Ezrecha Mikodesh Umitzion Yisadeka Yididai dai 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 Yididai dai 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 Bum 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 dai 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 dai
May we merit that divine help. May we see the third Beit HaMikdash built with the world in peace. Thank you, Chaim David Sirachi.